Thank you, thank you.
Oh, wow, that was overwhelming.
Christian, so good to have you. Thank you, thank you. So Christian and I have actually known each other for a few years, which makes this a lot of fun for me, especially because it's a natural conversation, and there's so many things that you've done, going back from the Army to being a serial entrepreneur to now pushing the innovation at universities, right? So getting the universities and the donors better matched, better suited to the projects of interest to them. So where did you get started? As a kid, what got you interested in business, entrepreneurship?
Well, let me just back up. You started by saying serial entrepreneur, and that would imply that it was on purpose. I call it more of a habitual entrepreneur. I'm trying to get out of this. I'm trying to break it. But I keep getting yanked back in because I can't help it. But yeah, no. I mean, to answer your question, where did it start? I don't know. I think my first money-making experience was selling honey. We had a big beehive in my house and growing up in LA, and I think it was a babysitting tactic. My parents would drop me off really far away. And sit me there with my brothers and sisters. We'd sit there and sell honey all day. And back then there were no cell phones, so you kind of hung out until their parents came back. So they probably were doing something fun.
Until you sold enough honey to buy a quarter to make the call.
Pretty much. Yeah, no, that was kind of the starting point. I don't know, but yeah, the rest is kind of history. I've done a lot of weird things. So just jumping into my background, I grew up. Well, I was born in Denmark. Grew up in LA. At the age of 16, I wasn't the perfect poster child. Family of 6, that was kind of the troublemaker, go figure. Everyone else ended up being doctors and engineers, and I wasn't that. So my mom thought it'd be a good idea for me to scoot around 16, so I went back to Denmark. It was my dad. I thought this is kind of weird, but kind of a sweet gig too, Drink anytime, at any age you can, at 16, you can go to a bar. So I'm like, this kind of works. And then went through high school, college, and then got drafted to the Army. Certainly was not part of the plan. But I figured, the original draft was 10 months. Anybody could do that. And I figured, I'll give it a shot. And basically through boot camp, they decided that I was really applying myself for whatever reason and decided to reissue my draft, send me to sergeant school. So I did that, extended it to 3 years, came back to a tour in Kosovo, and then the whole time thinking, man, wouldn't it be nice to not be in freezing cold Denmark? Yeah, San Diego really sounds about nice right about now. So I did my time there and came out and got back to San Diego as quickly as I could.
Nice. So as in the Army, you rose up quite a bit and learned some things, right? What kinds of experiences did you get from that you can apply to what you're doing now?
Probably mostly being put in some really precarious situations, being put in being put through stuff that you thought you'd never be able to actually get through. There was one experience where it was in the winter in Denmark. We had a 60K hump with full pack, and at one point they decided to stop us and send us through a water passage, literally. But we had to break the ice first on the water so that we could all safely pass. So guess what idiot got to run and break the ice first? That was a bad idea. But just stuff like that, you don't think that really means anything, but when you go through it and you're really in trying times, and it's all about camaraderie at that point. You and your team, everyone's helping each other through, and it really teaches you something about yourself, about your stick-to-itiveness, and your ability to just kind of persevere through anything. And it might have worked adversely because now I think I can do anything. So that's the downside. But so it was definitely an interesting experience.
Nice. And then after college, you studied business, right?
Did business in college, international business in Copenhagen. Didn't really know what I was going to do with it, to be honest. It was kind of boring and wasn't really all that interested. And came back here looking to continue that education at SDSU, and fortunately they didn't accept me because that meant I had to start my first business. So. Thank you, SDSU.
And what was the first business?
First one was a restaurant.
Okay.
It was actually kind of a family business that I got pulled into, and I ended up taking it over and running it for a few years, and then realized that it really wasn't scalable. It wasn't a great lifestyle as a 22-year-old to have a restaurant where I was there from 10 a.m. until 3 a.m. every single day, 6 days a week. I realized that it wasn't something that was going to become a national chain, and so at some point I had to pull the plug. had some great years, learned a lot. And that's what they say when you don't make money. You learn a lot. I learned a lot. And so I took that learning and decided to just pack everything up into a U-Haul and go to LA where I grew up, and didn't really know what I was going to do or why or with whom. And ended up getting a job with a company called Anderson Windows. They're made no sense. I had no background in this space, but I figured they were willing to hire me and give me a shot, so I'll take it. And so ended up somehow becoming the top salesman in the country for their renewable or their replacement division. Having really no background in the space, basically what I figured out was they'd give us 3 leads a day. One would be in like Ventura, one would be in Orange County, and one would be somewhere out east. And I'm going, this is not sustainable. This is not even fun. How do I find a way to do this better and faster? And so I started calling on homeowner associations, and I figured out that if I can go in and buy them lunch, bring some Subway sandwiches, I can get the homeowner association to approve my windows, and then the owners had no choice. So they had to that was a lot better, faster, and easier. And so all of a sudden, the phone started ringing, and I had to hire an assistant to answer my phone calls to send me out to all these people that were just really had no choice. They had to buy from me, and so that worked out well. That was fun. I didn't learn a lot, but I made some money that time. But I also realized that at some point this was going to dry up. A lot of people were using their home at the time as a credit card, and I realized this is not going to be sustainable. I had to figure something else out. And I had a buddy that worked for Morgan Stanley here in San Diego, and in that business you have your ups and downs, but it's an annuity, and you get paid on the assets that you raise, and it's mostly based on sales. So I figured maybe that's a good idea, and it's a great way to come back to San Diego. So I did that. Came down here, started with Morgan. Actually moved down during the 2004 fires.
Oh yeah.
You remember those? I was driving down with my U-Haul. There's literally burning embers coming across the 5. As I'm coming down, I'm going, what the hell am I doing? What is this really? My first day at Morgan Stanley in La Jolla, it was like orange haze. Nobody was in the office. They're like, here's the phone, answer calls. You got all these clients that are asking for all these complex transactions. I had no idea what they were talking about, and here I am working for Morgan Stanley. So that was interesting. But I got my licenses there, built up a small book, and then I eventually moved to Merrill Lynch, and realized pretty quickly that that was not really a place for an entrepreneur at all. There's so much compliance and so much regulation and so much restriction, and really I was trading on my own networks, and so I decided this was probably not the right place for me, and I started a company. That was my first real startup, which was Joe Media.
Yeah.
Because I think when we met.
Yes, and that's something I think everyone needs to hear about. But I mean, just so far, we went from honey to restaurants to windows to the financial advising industry. I mean, for the most part, it's sales, right? It's heavy relationship building, and I think that everything plays in, like Joe Media. I mean, what is Joe Media? What was the product?
So our product was basically finding a way to monetize free Wi-Fi, free internet. It all started, I had one client that was doing municipal Wi-Fi networks in Mexico. He had a company doing that. Then I had another client that owned a bunch of Denny's restaurants. And I met the municipal Wi-Fi guy at a Starbucks, and at the time it was T-Mobile. You had to pay to get on. And I was kind of like, this is ridiculous. I mean, look around, look at the demographics. Look how many people are using this. There's got to be some way to monetize this through a different revenue model. And so we didn't really think twice about it. We had a short conversation about it, didn't really think twice about it. And then about a month later, he sent me basically like a little box that had a router in it. And he said, hey, plug this in as per our conversation. Let me know what you think. And so I plug it into my office at Merrill, and I log on with my computer, and it takes me to a splash screen and shows me some ads and lets me get on the internet. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. I call him up. I'm like, hey, thanks, but how much does this cost you? Out of curiosity. He goes, including labor, about $100. It's a $50 Cisco router. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. So I called my Denny's client, and I'm like, hey, think about Wi-Fi? You ever thought about putting that in your restaurants? He goes, yeah, I got a bunch of bunch of bids for it, and I'm not really sure which business model, which vendor I want to use. Do you want to help me select a vendor? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but send me the bids. Let me check them out. And so that helped me with my pricing model. I basically came back to him. I'm like, hey, what if I just provide you with Wi-Fi? He's like, Christian, what the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about? I'm Maryland at the time, and he goes, well, and I explained what our plan was, and he goes, all right, test it in a couple stores, and you should sign up for the Denny's Franchisee Association. They'll let anybody in. and they do an annual event, and you should come like pitch it if it works. I'm like, cool. So we had it up and running in like 3 of his stores for like, you know, a couple of months. And he goes, this is awesome, because I'm sending him all kinds of reports like on stats and usage and, you know, what people are doing. And we also asked people to take a picture of the receipt so we could tell what they were spending. And so we were tracking all that, and he's like, wow, this is awesome. Like, they're spending, you know, 20% more than our average customer. They're coming in more often. I'm like, all right, well, then maybe we have something. And so I went to Hawaii for their Denny's Franchisee Association, and I'm still working for Merrill at the time. Don't tell him. I was like, okay, well, I bought a booth. I got to probably build a booth. So I went to Lowe's in Hawaii, and like, it was the cheesiest thing in the world. Like, I had our theme was "We'll hook you up, we'll hook you and your customers up" as a fishing theme. So I went to Lowe's. I'm like, how do I do a fishing theme? So I bought this like blue AstroTurf that was gonna be my ocean, and then I bought like a rope with a big hook at the end of it. And then I'm like, well, I need more than that. So I bought some nets and like some plastic fish, and I brought a couple friends with me and like had them like dressed up in waders. And we were the joke of this conference, man. We were, like, it was ridiculous, but people thought it was funny. And we had like, I think 300 stores sign up at this conference, because we marketed to them ahead of time. We were super aggressive and funny as hell. We bought a lot of drinks at the bar. That's really all it took. And these people came up and signed up, and I'm like, wow, now I probably better build this. I better like start a company and maybe think about actually like building a product. So I did. I came back and I quit my job and called the guy back that sent me the original router. I'm like, so we need to do this. I have 300 stores signed up. We got to make this happen. And he's like, cool. So we started a company together, and that was Joe Media. We got to about 700 and some odd stores. I raised my first angel round through my clients. So when I quit my job at Merrill, everyone assumed that I was going to another firm, and all the young guys were calling my clients and trying to like move the accounts over. And I invited them all to a dinner that night, and I didn't know any better, so I just like filled a room, bought everyone dinner, and like did it, you know, song and dance, and raised my angel round that way. I got $400,000 out of that night. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know like, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. And so we had our initial capital. We went out and rolled out the first couple hundred stores. And 2008 came around. Time for our VC round. This was really fun. So I'm like, well, you know, we're 30 days off of like just receivable financing this whole thing. I mean, the numbers in this thing were great. We had all the contracts. I was literally just financing contracts. And I decided to, you know, my law firm decided to introduced me to a few firms VC firms in the Valley. I think I talked to like 25 or 30 of them, and like the first 10, I was super excited because nobody said no. I was like, yes, they love me. Like, this is awesome. All they're saying, like, if you had the receivable, you know, if you had the funding, you know, like the revenue, we totally fund you. I'm like, awesome. I just got to figure that out. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That was a no. It took me a while to figure that out. About firm number 11 or 12, you know, I'm like, okay, this isn't going to happen. Nobody's funding anything. I got a problem. I got to figure out how to like organically grow this. And so we did. We trudged along for a couple of years. Never really had the funding that we needed to actually, you know, blow it up the way we thought we could. Brought on some other cool clients. Did a lot of concept work. Finally, ended up getting acquired by a digital out-of-home agency out of New York. Not a huge acquisition, but enough to be respectable and, you know, kind of allow me to look myself in the mirror after this this whole thing. And that's when I started working for OpenEye, which is a digital out-of-home media agency. Ran the West Coast operations and was kind of their like OpenEye Labs. I kind of created this concept for like creating new ideas that could be sold to you know, some of our clients. We did digital signage. We did a lot of touch screens. We did digital wayfinding. We did a lot of concept work for some banks. We did like some amusement parks. We did a lot of their wayfinding. Smithsonian was one of our clients. We did digital signage for Santander banks, so all the screens in there, which wasn't all that exciting at the end of the day, but it was kind of fun running the labs.
I've got to ask you about Joe Media. And I know when we get to the Q&A part, people are probably going to have questions about that, but if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you do differently? It sounds like you had a pretty awesome experience there.
You know, it was frustrating. I went through 3 signed term sheets with investors. All 3 of them fell through, and there's a funny story in that. But what I would do differently going back would probably be to not spend so much time trying to raise equity and just grow organically. We had customers that were willing to pay. We could have grown a lot more slowly than we thought we needed to. pulled in a lot more data and a lot more, a lot more proof points, I think, early on. And it was kind of a new space at the time. And so if I could do it over again, I'd probably be a little more conservative.
Okay. But that's because of the business model. If it was a different business model, then you wouldn't be able to grow it organically quite the same way, right? Based on the pricing and the financing of the receivables.
Yeah, it would have been a lot slower. I
Yeah.
mean, it would have been, we'd maybe grow like, 50, 100 stores a year kind of thing, which would have been overly exciting. And, we were like kind of go big or go home. But what got me excited was like, AT&T and other companies, T-Mobile, were acquiring wireless, like Wi-Fi networks at like 30x multiples in 2008. So I'm like, oh wow, this is a no-brainer. I got comparables. I can go raise capital against this, but it just didn't happen.
But after that exit and then OpenEye, what was the big thing that was exciting you then?
Well, it wasn't a big exit. First of all, it was very meager. But OpenEye was fun because we got to actually put our ideas, like all the ideas that I had pent up in Joe Media, I got to actually put them into action. We had a big pitch with some big banks, and some of the concepts that we had for the in-bank experience, they were all over. They were paying us ridiculous amounts of money for ideas and not even execution, which is like, wow, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. Like, they're paid for ideas, like who knew? That was interesting for a short amount of time, but then I realized it wasn't also really going to scale. It was kind of more of like a service model more than anything else. And so I was kind of looking for the next opportunity, kind of poking around. And by the way, there's a part of this that I left out, which was while I had Joe Media, I was running. I had this interest in nonprofit. So I don't know if it was like filling an empty space in my soul or what it really was, but I started off with the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce, which is really more about like connecting companies and connecting entrepreneurs and scientists to a certain degree. And by the way, there's a really big Swedish group in San Diego, mostly because of the industries in Sweden and San Diego overlap so well. It's like wireless, life science, defense, and clean tech. And so we did a lot of networking for those kinds of companies. And I found that actually to be a lot, like actually fun. It was like an outlet, from the startup world. And after that, I turned out of that thing, and then my wife and I started a nonprofit fundraiser for homeless charities in San Diego. And we got, she works for Hilton, and so we got like all 24 Hilton hotels in San Diego to lean on their vendors and to get these huge events put together with zero overhead. We had like 25 volunteers, zero overhead. We hosted them at Hilton Torrey Pines, big galas, black tie, had 500 people show up, and 100% of what we raised went to these 5 or 6 charities that we chose, and that just felt really good.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Not bad.
The fallout though from that was, I'm kind of inquiring. I'm like, okay, so tell us what happened. Where'd the money go? What kind of programs are you doing? Can we come along? Can we, maybe bring a film crew and see what's going on? And I kept getting all these barriers, like, oh yeah, well, we'll send you the report, and they didn't really want us coming along. I'm like, well, what's the deal here? We're gonna throw another event next year. We better have some media. We better have some collateral. And they were just always standoffish. We did another event the following year. We raised about $500,000, 600,000, and we're kind of like, a lot of these people that I'm distributing to, sorry, but I probably wouldn't hire them to tie my shoes. I'm going, something's wrong here. Something's not right. Why are they not willing to treat us like a customer? Why are they not willing to just tell us what happened? And bring us along and let us engage. And that just wasn't part of the culture. And so we kind of got tired of that. Stopped doing that after the second year, which is a shame. And then I started volunteering at Connect, which is where we met as an entrepreneur in residence. And I just kind of wanted to be involved in like early stage companies, kind of like idea on the back of a napkin, like helping somebody decide whether they should quit their day job or not. Like that to me was much more important than like kind of later stage. And so I did that for a while, and yeah, that's where we met, and that's where I met most of my co-founders for Benefunder.
Very cool. So and that's really where all these stories are the beginnings of Benefunder, right? What else really said, okay, this is what I need to be doing? What triggered it in your mind?
So I had, as part of OpenEye Labs, I had like 5 or 6 like startup concepts that we would share with our clients to show really that we knew what the hell we were talking about with new innovations and new ideas. And I'd pitch these wherever I went. Like I had these 6 like little paragraphs, and I'd be ready to just pitch them with whoever I had lunch with or met with. I'd always like ask for the last 20 minutes, like, let me just pitch a couple ideas to you. Let me know what you think. And one of them was kind of the Benefunder concept. And it wasn't really all that real to me at the time until my nephew, my sister's youngest, I come from a big family of 6, and my sister's youngest got diagnosed with a rare liver cancer. And that threw the whole family for a loop. All of a sudden everything was on its head, and we're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So my sister moved up to Stanford, to Palo Alto, and my nephew was going through treatment. Fast forward a year later, he's now cancer-free, and the family's all thinking, how do we give back? How do we pay this forward? And everyone else being doctors and engineers, I was the guy that kind of had to figure this out. And so I talked to the researchers, and they're kind of like, well, you can gift through Stanford. By the time it gets through the university and gets to me, there really won't be much left. You're probably better off, giving to like American Cancer Society. That's where I get most of my grants. And first of all, as an entrepreneur, I'm going, hold on. I was like going to write you a check, and you said, no, go to somewhere else? That's the weirdest answer I've ever heard in my life, first of all. That made no sense. But I'm like, okay, I understand, most public charities, I wouldn't get a chance to direct my funds or necessarily even know what came out of it. But let's look into it. And we found basically 73% came off the top before it actually got to research, right? So 10% in direct, overhead, and the rest was basically program-related expenses, which meant they didn't have to tell you what they were doing. I'm like, that's out of the question. That's not happening. So we looked into creating our own private foundation. And long and short of it is, it takes about 1.5 years to get your 501c3 designation or 501 whatever. And if you're going to do it right, you're hiring a scientific committee to really help you, create an RFP, send it out, monitor it, and I do all that. I'm like, $200,000 and a couple of years to write the first check is off the table.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I went, this isn't about my nephew. This isn't about, pediatric cancer. This is a donor problem. This is ridiculous. It should be easy to fund research. Like, why can't I just write a check and know what happened? And so we started kind of looking into it. And at the time, I was at IRA Connect, so I was kind of socializing this idea more than I was, earlier. And met a couple co-founders. Met one that was a researcher at UCSD who's in big data algorithms. Another guy that was spent 25 years on Wall Street selling like data-driven products into the big banks. And we're kind of talking about this problem. We were doing our research on it. We realized that less than 3% of philanthropy today is going into research. And when you look at research as a whole, like 50% of all wealth created in the U.S. since World War II can be traced back to a research grant. So you're going, wow, there is like a huge disconnect. I mean, going back to risk-adjusted rate of return from my financial advisory days and going, this is ridiculous. Like, this is so inefficient, it's not even funny. We should have, 15 to 20% of our total philanthropy picture going to research, because that's providing us economic returns, it's providing us social returns, it's curing diseases, it's given us MRI, the internet, Google, I mean, you name it. Like it's come out of research lab at some point. So I'm like, this is crazy. We got to figure this out.
The Chinese proverb, right? Teach a man to fish, right? Rather than providing the fish. So it's solving the underlying problems, right?
Exactly. And if you look at, I challenge you to look at any social issue that we have right now. There's a lot of, like, going back to the homeless example, right? You can go out and you can provide food and you can provide shelter and you can provide all these things for the homeless, but what if you were to look at like what made them homeless in the first place, right? There's mental issues, there's social issues, there's all kinds of other things that brought them there. And what if we figured out how to kind of fix that upstream so that didn't happen in the first place? Like, what kind of multiple would that have? What kind of like effect would that have downstream? And that's really what kind of opened my mind up to like what can really happen in research, right? I mean, it covers literally everything under the sun that you can possibly imagine being interested in.
Now that's really cool. I mean, what can happen in research? What kinds of cool ideas are you seeing? Projects, research?
Oh man, there's so many I can't even like start to mention them. But what inspires me is, and what we're doing now is working with researchers and understanding not only what they're doing, because there's some super cool stuff going on, but also why they got into it in the first place. Because you don't become a researcher for the money, right? You get into research because you're trying to have an outcome and you're trying to solve a major problem, and that's really kind of interesting to be around, right? We have researchers that cover like health, tech, environment, and arts and humanities, and the ones that have kind of made a big impression on me early on Let's see. We had one at UC San Diego that's now 3D printing human skin, so you never need to do a skin graft ever again. So the basic concept is they can scan a burned area, they can take a small sample, and they have this like they call it like a bioladder, like a material that they can print onto. They can print the skin right there in the hospital room, and there's no chance of rejection, and it's exactly the size that you need. I heard that, I'm like, hold on a second, you're talking about this like it's normal. Like, what? You're telling me you're going to print skin? What do you? I just couldn't believe it. We had another one. We did a lab visit at UC Irvine, and this woman, small Indian woman, was talking about the Internet of Things. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, get to the point. She gets into, well, I've got these sensors that we're attaching to first responders, and basically it can detect gases in the air and like location and like a dangerous environment. And so most of the deaths for first responders happens because they've been exposed for too long, they don't realize it, they get delirious, and they get lost. So this basically solves that problem. Like, you will no longer, you can basically like see your entire team within a building. You can tell when they've been exposed too long, you can pull them out. And she's like, oh yeah, and by the way, we have this, we're testing it right now with Orange County Fire Department. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, where's my checkbook? Like this is so freaking cool. We have, veterans issues, right? We have a gentleman that's doing a clinical trial right now for PTSD. Early trials show 90% efficacy in treating PTSD. Like, it is no longer an issue. No drugs, non-invasive, treating PTSD. Imagine what that would do to our VA system, like downstream. Like, these are things that have major impacts downstream. And that's what just kind of, I have no business being in this room with you, but what the hell, there's no way I can't do this.
Wow. So, part of what's driving this, though, is the fact that you've built these relationships, right? Like with the universities. There's been news articles, and you've been running around across coast, DC, and talking to universities. What are some of like the big relationships that have been successful and instrumental to the future that you see?
So when we took this on, I pitched it to a couple of like angel groups, and part of my motivation now is them telling me there's no way in hell this is going to happen.
You like to hear
legally
that.
Possible. There's no way the university is going to sign on, and there's no way you're going to get like your core partners, which is banks in our case. There's no way this is going to happen. That was my motivation. That's what keeps me going, because I can't wait to.
Love the pitch.
Yeah, but I think the big coups that we had were figuring out the researcher side. So we started off at UCSD. It's in our backyard, and they've got a tremendous amount of incredible research going on. And we managed to convince the admin that this is something that should be done, or at least tried. We then got researchers to sign on. We reached out. We now have 750 researchers across the country, 55 universities represented, and we just signed our 7th institutional agreement, which was Harvard, which is pretty good. Yeah, good one to have in the repertoire. And then the other side of it was, which also people said was impossible, was to get, like, we wanted to find a way where we wouldn't have to spend 40% of the funds that we raised in fundraising costs, which is what most nonprofits do, right? It's kind of a broken model. 40% fundraising costs, that like directly contradicts what the donor is looking for. And then you've got all these other expenses that don't really serve the purpose. So we had to like hack that. We had to figure out a way to do this in a scalable way. And I was looking back at my wealth management days, and I'm like, the amount of like the average wealth advisor has $150 million under management. They lose 2% each year to philanthropy, right? That's a ridiculous. That's $2 million, $3 million each year that they're that's lost revenue to them, and they're not having the conversation. So I'm going, well, what if we can fix that? What if we can help them retain some of those assets, and what if we can kind of introduce this into their practice, which makes their practice more sticky with their clients, and does a lot of the things to kind of satisfy the client. No donor wants to spend 73% in overhead. Like, it's not what you kind of wake up in the morning and decide that you want to do, right? So we created this product that's it's technically a donor advised fund. Donor advised fund is like a nonprofit vehicle that allows you to make a donation, take an immediate tax deduction, and then spend stuff down over time. And generally, it's like evil as hell, because if you think about now, you just created a vehicle that gives you a tax deduction, but prevents money from going to like philanthropy and causes,
So
helping the world.
let's pause right there real quick, because this is really important. This is what makes Benefunders so interesting to a lot of people, right? It's tax time. Yeah, it's tax planning time. It's November, right? So we have basically, 6 more weeks to do whatever we're going to do before the end of the year for tax planning purposes, right? April 15th rolls around. It's time to, before then or by then, or you file the extension, right? Personal tax time. Mm-hmm. So you have to either race to make the donation to your favorite charity, research, or whatever now, or with Benefunder, there's the ability to call up, right, or to contact Benefunder and put money into a donor-advised fund. So what exactly does that mean in terms of the logistics?
So it's basically like having a bank account. So we set up a bank account. We allow you to like fund that account with like appreciated assets. If you got stocks or bonds or whatever, you can throw it into this account. You get an immediate tax deduction, and then we help you plan like the giving over time. In our case, we actually require you to distribute, which in most cases, actually in almost all of the cases, they don't. But what this does, doing it this way actually has benefits on both sides. So to the donor, it kind of gives you control. So if you are distributing funds over time against like metrics and feedback, you've got a little more control, right? If somebody's not going the way you want it to go, you can make a change. And then on the researcher side, what we're providing is funding that doesn't have restrictions. So every dollar that a researcher raises, by and large, has some kind of restriction. You either can't buy equipment, or you can't hire people, or you can't do X or Y or Z. There's all these like intricate rules. And so we're saying, forget all that. Do what you need with this money. You're running your lab. You do what you need with this money. You don't need to apply for a grant. You basically just create a profile with us. And as long as you're using the funds for what you say in your profile, everyone's happy. So it's kind of taking the whole RFP system and flipping it on its head too.
An RFP?
Request for proposal, which is what really bogs down most like private foundations and most large grant makers. It's like expensive and time consuming to give your money away. If you're going to do an RFP, you got to hire the scientific committee. You got to like figure out what you're going to fund. Then you got to send out the RFP, and hopefully you have a good list to send it to. Then you got to like manage all the questions. And then when you finally make a decision on who you're going to fund, you got to chase the money. And we're saying, why? Just flip it. Let the researcher tell us what they're working on, and as long as they're providing us with updates, you don't need an RFP.
Yeah.
You can fund immediately, and you get the feedback. And if you don't like it, you like what they're doing, you can just make a change and fund somebody else. So that's kind of what we're doing now, is creating this marketplace that makes funding far more efficient, makes it a lot faster. So like today, researchers spend 60% of their time like applying for grants.
Doesn't make sense.
That's not fun. Nobody's
It's
having
not
fun.
efficient.
Like the people writing the checks aren't having fun because they gotta like hire this board of stiffs that are gonna like pontificate on like how well a grant is written, right? And it takes 6 months to make a decision, and then you gotta chase it. And then on the other side of it, you got the researcher that's like filling out like endless grant applications. Right now, NIH has like an 8% success rate. 8%. Like you're filling out a ton of grants, hoping to get one, and you're applying for all kinds of crap that has nothing to do with your research, but you're just hoping that you get funded, right? So it's not really working for either side. And so that's what we're trying to change.
So I've got just one more question before we open it up for questions, and I know that you really want to hear what some questions that people have out there. It's the interaction, and ultimately it goes to this last question here. But what you're doing is helping to drive innovation at to drive innovation at universities because of the research, right? Mm-hmm. And it's helping to facilitate the connections. And you mentioned at the beginning that in terms of being a serial entrepreneur, that's hopefully something that will eventually change, right? But what is it that you see going forward as being something that you're targeting? What big success are you still working towards?
Well, biggest success is getting like Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch to like include us as a product, because that just changes our world completely, and we're getting close. But that's something that I can't necessarily control the timing on. What gets me a lot more excited is as I'm learning more about what you can and can't do in philanthropy and nonprofits. And I just wrote an article about this not too long ago in Stanford Social Innovation Review, was the notion that you can use a philanthropic account to actually invest in early stage startups that are too risky, or the time horizon is too long for a normal investor to come in on. And if we can find a way to kind of like bridge the valley of death with a new class of risk capital, there's $360 billion every year in philanthropy in the U.S. alone. That's just individual giving, right? If we just take a small percentage of that, and 25% of that is coming through the top 10 firms, wealth management firms. So there's a ton of money flowing through these firms, and people generally want to know that they're having an impact. Well, if you have a project that has gone through 20 years in labs, from basic all the way through to commercialization stages of research, that might be $50 million in taxpayer dollars into that technology. And it dies in the vine, by and large, because you can't raise that first capital. And I mean, I would invest because I don't have that kind of risk tolerance, right? But if I had a philanthropic account that said, you know what, I'm never going to see this money back, but I can use this money to give this team a shot at commercializing, bridging that gap. Talk about impact. You know, it could be in healthcare space, it could be in clean energy environment, it could be in anything you really care about. And where could you have more impact than, you know, creating jobs, funding a startup company, and giving someone a shot at going and making a big company. So that's what gets me excited, is being able to fill that gap.
So if entrepreneurship really is about problems and solutions, I mean, that's really everything you're talking about. It's finding new solutions to problems, and those problems could even be coming from the solution providers. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and there's our infrastructure in universities. I mean, I'm not an academic, obviously. I never thought about this before, but the infrastructure is insane. The amount of money that goes into, you know, trial and error, where it's okay to fail, and bringing some of these technologies from, like, you know, let's test, you know, like genetics on fruit flies. Like, where the hell is that ever going to turn into? Well, I'll tell you where that turns into. Now there's researchers at UCSD that can genetically engineer fruit flies to the point where they can stop major diseases from spreading through insects. Like, that's pretty damn good reason to, like, research fruit flies, right? And so that's the kind of that's what the potential is, and you never know where it's going to come from. So you have to be willing to take risk. And where are you going to take that risk other than in an account where you're never going to see a dollar back anyway? Mm-hmm. Right? And, you know, yeah, you can go to, you know, whatever blank society and, you know, fund their next gala or whatever. That's cool. You know, or you can, like, put your money to work directly, like, in these projects that are like super personal to you, where you, like, as an entrepreneur, you could even come in and kind of help them develop their idea and make introductions for them and interact with them and do lab, you know, like, visit them in the lab and, like, you know, just be personal with them and help them out. Yeah. And so that, to me, is just way more exciting. That's what, you know, gets me excited about what we're doing about the future of Benefunder. That's way too much of a commercial. I didn't plan on coming Benefunder, but you can tell I'm kind of passionate.
No, we're getting great insights into who you are and what makes you tick. And that's really what this is all about. With that said, love to turn it open to questions. Who has an interesting question? I know that we've had a few that I've talked to. We've already got a few hands coming. So please, Alex.
So I had a quick question. So you mentioned, obviously, the government and NIH and sort of all of the different grants and things like that people are looking for. Are you, or have you had, whether it's local municipalities or just the federal government in general, reach out to you to figure out better ways in how to get the money from point A to point B? Because clearly, 8% in NIH is, like, that's pretty awful.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, so we have had a little bit of that. We got invited to the White House for the Clean Energy Investment Summit, you know, in the summer, and they brought us in to kind of, like, represent academia, and so we were, like, part of that conversation, talking about, like, you know, what's going on in academia and how is it going to change, you know, like, the whole climate change perspective, right? But that's about as far as it's gone. We've had some other funding agencies like DARPA and ARPA-E kind of look at us and go, this is interesting. You know, you can, because their funds are limited. There's only so many things that they can actually fund. But from our perspective, if they're willing to share information with us, then we can share that with the donor public, right? So in our case, we don't pick winners and losers. We just want to make it easy to help a donor make the best decision for them, whatever that is. Like we joke, we say, I don't care if you're interested in underwater basket weaving, we will find you the best underwater basket weavers in the country, right? And the best way we can do that is by leveraging other scientific committees that have reviewed a researcher's work and said thumbs up and thumbs down. And so what we're trying to do now is get some of these agencies to share that information with us, like share their requirements and share, like, their vetting process, so that we can basically put, like, a DARPA logo on a researcher's, you know, page and say, like, look, you know, if you're interested in you're, you know, you think DARPA's smart, they funded this person, maybe you ought to think about doing the same. But other than that, it hasn't really been like, let's collaborate or, you know, come teach us how to do this differently. They're pretty set in their ways.
And the next question?
I want to take a couple of steps back to the conversation you were having with College and Stanford,
Yeah.
who correctly pointed out that if you give money to Stanford, they're going to keep 80% of it at least before the researcher sees anything. So I'd like to understand a little more clearly. I mean, the model here is someone with money sees someone's treating childhood liver cancer and wants to give them $500,000 to quicker getting a cure. How did you get the university to not want to take $400,000 out of that?
That's the secret sauce. Like, no. So basically what we did was we went back to the whole argument around, there's only 3% of philanthropy going to research. So we're basically saying, I'm not interested in fighting you over the 3%. I'm going after the 97%. And we have this big channel through wealth management who you could never get in with, right? So we're a channel to you. We're not going to pay you your full 80% or 50% or whatever it is, but we'll let you take your standard gift overhead and we'll bring you new funds. And they basically bought into that. And
so it was an increase of revenue.
It's incremental.
Justified not taking as much.
Exactly. Well, and there's still, it's coming through as a gift, so there's no burden on the admin whatsoever, right? This is purely the researcher that is providing us with updates, which they're doing anyway for NIH or NSF or anyone else. So they have no requirements whatsoever, and there's also no restrictions on the fund, so there's nothing to manage, right? And they're still getting their 6% or 8% or 10%, whatever that gift overhead happens to be.
I've got a follow-up question to that, actually. So this is all really since the the Great Recession, right? And because of the Great Recession, it's been tougher for universities, especially public universities and colleges, to get state funding. So have you found more success with Benefunder developing relationships with the public universities versus the private that have more wherewithal to raise the funds privately, to have their own private endowments? Or is that completely irrelevant?
How do I answer that without getting myself in trouble? Not really. So we brought Harvard on most recently, right? And they've got an $80 billion endowment. And you kind of ask yourself, why do they need funding for research? Well, those are two different pots of money, and the endowment money does different things for them than necessarily the research money. And they're all kind of in the same boat. I mean, really, it has more to do with like your seniority. So the average age of the first grant for an NIH is like 43 right now, and that's the same if you're at Harvard or if you're somewhere else, right? And so what this does is kind of evens the playing field a little bit more and allows people to fund what they want. So we have donors that come to us and say, I want to fund the guys that haven't gotten their first funding yet. I want to fund fund the career award. I want to help make somebody's career in this space, and show me those people. And then you might have others that are much more interested in show me the people that have been vetted by X, Y, and Z, because that's I know they're smart and I want to follow what they're doing. Or we have some that say I'm only interested in the last mile and commercializing stuff and getting it to market. And then you have the other ones that say I want to find the next big discovery. Like we spent trillions of dollars in cancer. We don't really have any real answers yet. Let's put our money in the early stage and really find that big breakthrough. Like let's fund that. So it really is across the board. There's no real rhyme or reason, but that's the beauty of it, because it all needs to be funded, right? And you couldn't have commercialization without basic research. It just wouldn't happen. So it really is all about what the individual's interested in, and we just match that.
Sounds kind of like a more complex version of Anderson Windows in the lunch, right? Everyone wins. It's just not as straightforward.
Right. Yeah, that you could say that again. Yeah.
Nice. What other kinds of questions are out there? Yes.
So you say you're trying to bridge the gap between philanthropies and funding and startups, right? And I was wondering what kind of limitations are there with groups entering Benefunder? Groups that want to be funded.
So a lot of it has to do with the stage that we're at. We're still small. We're still a startup. The kind of part of the beauty of our model is that we're this little nothing between the Merrill Lynch of the world and the MIT Foundation. So that works really well, right? Merrill Lynch knows that MIT Foundation doesn't want to have a headline of someone taking the money and running, right? So they have ways to mitigate that. For us to get into funding startups, we really need to rely on third-party partners to help us kind of set the term sheet, do the due diligence, that kind of stuff. So we're partnering now. There's a growing number of foundations that are getting into the impact investing space. In fact, if you go to Council on Foundations, which is the big industry group for nonprofits, the impact investing track is like packed. Everybody wants to know what's going on, so it's growing really fast. And for entrepreneurs, you might want to look at it. If you have a social venture or anything that you can draw a correlation to a social outcome, seriously look at nonprofits, and because their term sheets will typically be more favorable. They're not, I wouldn't say easier to find funding with, but they have a different motive, right? So it's definitely worth looking at. But in our case,
What was that site called?
well, Council on Foundations, they have like an impact investing track, but you can look at social venture partners that's starting to get into it. There's a number of kind of more socially minded groups that are looking more at the space. And I can send you some links too. If you give me your card, I'll definitely follow up. But in our case, what we're looking for specifically is startups that are being spun out of these labs, right? Where maybe we create a relationship with the researchers, maybe even over a number of years, and they're now at this point of commercialization, and the donor says, "Well, I want to see this. I want to see this through. I want to see this come to fruition. Maybe I'll allocate some of my donation dollars to investing in the company, for kind of an early stage. Go get your proof of concept. Go get your milestone, whatever it is. Get a CEO or get a customer or finish your prototype." And that's where we want to play. We want to be the first money in. We probably wouldn't. We don't want to disrupt any other funding channels. We just want to create kind of like a new class of money. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. We're partnering with some other nonprofits like the Thiel Foundation. It does some really cool stuff. They actually invest in companies. And there's a number of others like the Knight Foundation and Rockefeller. And
Oh, the Knight, yeah.
some of these other like big Kaufman as well. They're all doing this and getting in kind of heavier and heavier. So it really depends on what industry you're in. That would kind of dictate which groups of that you go after for funding, but it's out there.
So something to add to that I think would be helpful for everyone is some of these foundations, Kaufman, Knight, they're not based in San Diego. Connect is here in San Diego. Social Venture Partners is all over, but is here in San Diego. But Social Venture Partners is something, I was at a pitch day for Startup Leadership Program on Saturday. I was on the panel, and two things that came up were, one, Benefunder. Somebody actually mentioned Benefunder when giving feedback to one of the presenters, and two, the Social Venture Partners. And so that's something people should know more about, especially when it comes to everything we're talking about tonight. So what is it, and how does it compare to Connect?
Well, I think they're all parts of the ecosystem, so they're not like either or. Connect for us has been awesome. That's where I met my co-founders. They've incubated us. They've made more introductions for us than I can possibly have ever asked for, so they've been awesome. We actually went through the Springboard program, so it was weird going from brought my first company through, became a coach, then went back and brought another company through, and sitting at the other side of the table was an interesting experience. It made me appreciate being a coach a little more. But I think they all do different things. And, Social Venture Partners primarily works with nonprofits, although they're starting to work more with for-profits.
Oh, really?
They're based primarily, they're centered in Seattle. And that's where I think the most active chapter is. And they're starting to think a lot more about, for-profit and how do you help a company that has a for-profit model, become more successful. I think there's also a group that's starting here in San Diego called Impact Hub.
Oh,
which I
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
look at. They're doing some really cool stuff. But yeah, there isn't as much early stage capital from some of these larger foundations in San Diego, but you just got to seek them out. And I'll tell you, we're raising capital too. We're a hybrid organization. We have a for-profit and a nonprofit, so we're also looking to raise money. And it's just natural for us to go to some of these larger foundations. And I'll say it's a totally different experience talking to foundations about investment. The questions are completely different. The intended outcomes, what they're looking for. You could be talking to them about investment, and they might say, "Well, what if we just gave you the money? Would that be okay?" Wait a minute, what? You would do that? That's possible? I've never heard that before. So it's definitely worth giving it a shot. But I think what we're trying to do is be part of the ecosystem, right? I see in the future down the road, once we're done matching philanthropists with researchers, I would love to match researchers with entrepreneurs, right? There's so much IP, so many great ideas, so much intellectual capital, and so much know-how. If you could take an entrepreneur that's been there and done that and has been through the ups and downs and knows what it takes to actually run a company and match them with a researcher who's taken this technology, to where it is today, that could be groundbreaking and change the world, and put the two together, and then add a little bit of capital. That's a pretty cool combination.
Good formula. Who else has a question?
Is the idea of philanthropic accounts, is that a new concept?
Not really. So like donor advised funds have been around for 10 or 20 years. They kind of really started taking off in the last 10. But when I say take off, I mean they're growing double digits. They're the fastest growing account type in wealth management right now. Nobody knows about them. $70 billion in assets sitting in donor advised funds right now.
So imagine even though it's not that new, there are probably, when you're getting it going, issues to overcome in terms of both getting your 501 status as well as for your donors as well.
Yeah, so it normally takes between 6 and 18 months to get your 501c3. We did it in like 6 months and 3 days, which is like a record. Our attorneys couldn't believe it. So that's difficult. There's definitely a barrier there. And then it's, like access to capital, like where are you going to find your donors? That's the next big problem. The problem with donor advised funds that are out there right now is they don't really have an incentive to put the money to work, right? A lot of these big banks, they make money by managing money. So they offer a donor advised fund, they're still managing the money. They really don't want you putting that money to work. So it's not easy to find like a donor advised fund holder. And you can't go to like a bank donor advised fund and say, hey, I want to pitch your donors about, this cool concept I have. It's just not going to happen. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to make it so that like there is this funnel, that you can come to and make that pitch. And I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, we'd be able to like syndicate, a startup funding, much like you syndicate an IPO in a wealth management firm. And they syndicate billion-dollar deals like in minutes. And just because they know who's interested, they know who has assets available. There's just so much data, and it's just a matching issue, right? And so at some point, hopefully, we'll find, we'll have an issue where someone's got a cure for malaria, and we'll be able to say, well, who's interested in malaria on the donor side, and be able to match that quickly and, get them off and running. It'll be a while, but, that's the dream.
Next question up here.
You kind of answered a question I had. Seems like you have a knack for finding gaps in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. And you kind of touched on one there with connecting entrepreneurs with scientists. I was wondering, any other gaps out there that you're thinking about? You're like, man, if I only had the time where I could clone myself to tackle that,
Oh, wow.
I would.
The world would be in trouble if I can clone myself. That would be a good thing. Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I mean, I'm sure there's a thousand things. I mean, I come across them in research, quite a bit. There are lots of other gaps. The question is, you find a gap, and then you got to think about like how are you going to monetize it, how are you going to get people behind the idea, how are you going to build a team, how are you going to do it. So there's starting with that problem is like step 1 out of 500, and we're still figuring out the steps in our model, and we've got a long way to go. But there's a lot. I mean, I drive my wife crazy. We go out to dinner, and I'll start thinking of ways where the restaurant can make their business more efficient. And I'll talk to her about it. She's like, "Shut up! Like you're ridiculous. Like just stop. Don't say another word." Like I just can't help it. So there's a downside to it. That's for sure.
Sweet.
Nice. All right, who's next? I think Jessica had a question concerning the donation history, yeah?
Yes.
What is that question, Jessica?
I forgot.
Uh-oh. Make one up.
Well, I think Tom can jump in, yes.
Yeah, Christian, it sounds to me, Martin asked a great question earlier. It sounds to me like you're really offering universities and researchers a chance to augment their normal donor management program. Because they're still going to have staff that are out looking for funds from alum to build their endowment.
Yeah.
And you're coming to the table and saying, we have this alternative where we have a whole new pot of money out here that we're finding, and we have a vehicle that will allow that money to get to the researchers faster, better, with less overhead. So why wouldn't universities be excited about talking with you?
When you put it to them that way, they do get pretty excited. There's a lot of universities are extremely conservative. They have been doing things the way they do it. They believe that's the right way to do it for decades. So getting them to change path is very difficult. Even though you're coming in saying, hey, look, there's this new pot of money. Well, the pot of money's not really there yet. We're saying, we'll if you come on first, then we'll kind of go get this pot of money. And it might work out, right? So just trust us. And by the way, while you're doing that, give us your most valuable asset, right, which is your researcher data, and let us use your brand while you're at it, right? That's not that easy of a sale. That's why the first one took over a year to get on, and the last one, it took 5 or 6 months of serious convincing. But they are interested in a new model. They do see the promise in what we're bringing to the table. And that's been a huge validation point for us, as a team, to say, yeah, we're doing the right thing, we're on the right track. Also, I'd say that university development, they immediately, when they don't know about us, they immediately assume we're moving their cheese. They're like, hold on, you're obviously going after our donors, right? Because this is our entire world, this is all we know, and this is where we raise our money, and you're trying to divert that. And so we really have to convince them that is not what we're interested in whatsoever. I mean, while we can't guarantee that some of the donors might not be like a Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch client, of course they might be, but there's this whole other world out there, and you got to convince them that, hey, Harvard, you're going to compete favorably against most of the universities out there. You're probably going to get more than your fair share of funding, if you come on board. And so I'll never forget, we had the head of development at Harvard. We went to Boston in March, and it was cold as hell, and we did this whole tour of the university. Last meeting was with admin, and the development officer didn't show up. I thought, okay, this is a sign. This is not going anywhere. I'm like, oh, great. Totally took it personally. I'm like, this is done. We're shot. It was a waste of time. Guy walks in 30 minutes late. Had another meeting with some huge donor, so I kind of understood. And he goes, hold on a second. So you're telling me that if I have a capital raise program, all I got to do is come to you and you can get me into wealth management? I'm like, yep. He's like, all right, I'm in. I'm like, what? Did that really just happen? I mean, that was the only input that person had. He basically dropped the mic and walked. I'm like, that was kind of cool. Can I record that? Can I get a quote? So it's really hit or miss. These universities are all completely different.
Thank you.
Are you guys collecting any metrics? The first one took a year to get on. You've had them on for a while, I assume now. Is there anything you could show them that this is accretive to them, or were you able to use in your later pitches?
For the university, you mean, or?
Yeah.
No, not really yet, because we're still trying to break down these barriers with these big wealth management firms. Like, our big coup was we got through Morgan Stanley, and we now have our first account open as of like 3 weeks ago with a private banking group. So that's a big deal for us. But until then, like, we really had nothing, to back to and say this is working.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're raising this whole thing on an idea, and you have a lot of different relationships that you have to.
Yeah, and it's like herding cats. I mean, it was definitely a challenge, but a lot of it had to do in the academic space around, who else is in. Not necessarily how much money do you have in the fund, but who else is buying into this and who else has vetted this, right? And that really helped us. And that was I wasn't expecting that. That didn't equate to me as a business person. My first question would have been all about how much money's in there, what are the metrics, and what's going on here. And I think what they're seeing is this is a new model. They've all tried crowdfunding, and research in academia doesn't really work out. Mostly because you don't have a deliverable, right? And small contributions are not going to help. That $25,000 glass ceiling, that's a week, in some of these labs, right? That's not going to work. And you don't have like the high net worth and ultra high net worth groups coming into crowdfunding. It's just not happening yet. Right. And so that's really where we kind of said, look, this is different. We're directly targeting a whole different community, and here's the problems that we're solving for them, right? We're making it easier for them to fund you. We're breaking down those barriers. And so I'm not sure exactly what one of those points.
Yeah, somewhere around there you hit the chord.
Somewhere around there, yeah. It kind of took the scales and taking it on.
So do you worry about, because you mentioned sort of like obviously the large universities and getting funds and stuff, but the researchers themselves, like I think about crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, you have like one thing and then all of a sudden it's a cooler with lights and makes $1 million, right? Like,
right.
Do you worry, or is there any kind of worry, or people brought up concerns about sort of like the rock star professors who then are like, hey, I got this new thing that I'm working on, or hey, I got this other, and then other people who have research that really want to get it sort of are still kind of left out in the cold because the money's just going to people who've already, they were at Harvard or they're wherever.
Well, most of it actually comes from the basic researchers are so used to not getting any funding. They're like, why should I come on? Like, people are not going to be interested in what I'm doing, so why would I participate in this. So that's been most of it. There's some people have asked about like the popularity effect. Like some researchers are really good speakers and others are not, and that has nothing to do with the quality of their work. And so that's part of our job is to make sure that we're making the right matches. We have some donors that want to be they're super type A, they want to be really hands-on, and you don't want to match them with somebody who's a total introvert and won't look you in the eye when they're talking to you, that kind of thing. And in our model, we interview every researcher. We actually write their profile, we curate everything, so we have a good sense of who they are. So that helps us in the kind of the matchmaking process. And we also kind of, like in every conversation we have with a with a donor, we talk about the importance of diversification. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. It's probably not going to work out. Like if you think it's bad in the VC world, 1 in 3 in 10 maybe, this is totally different. This is much less, right? And it might take 5 times as long, and it might cost twice as much or 3 times as much. You just don't know where success is going to come from. And in this case, success isn't like a monetary outcome. It's not a return. It's moving the needle from like this stage to that stage. Or even if it's a total failure, now that becomes public information, and all these other researchers across the country are not going to make that same mistake or go through that same channel, right? So that's a big part of our challenge is like basically educating the donor on like what is success and what is impact, and like defining what it is that you're looking for as a donor, right? Because if you're looking for a company that's going to be the next Google, it's probably not going to work out, right? Like we need to like change our metrics and the way we measure this, and that's one of our biggest challenges. But by and large, I think we have a pretty good mix of researchers. But I mean, every time we have like a donor request, it just kills me. It's like they'll find the one thing we don't have. It's like, and then it doesn't matter that we have 750 researchers. We don't have what they're looking for. We're like, oh damn, we got to figure this out. We got to get them on quick. So it's funny how that Murphy's Law kind of jumps in every time. We just had one this week. It was like UBS called us and they're like, oh, we have this huge, this big client, major relationship, and they're looking for, I can't even say the word, it's like some kind of a neurodegenerative disease that affects kids. Super rare. Of course, we didn't have any. Have a match, and so we're scrambling. We sent out an email and like crowdsourcing, who might be a fit for this. And we had one that was like in lupus, some weird strain of lupus, same kind of thing. It's a mad scramble. We sent out emails to all our researchers. Who do you know? Like, you send it to us right now. And they're like, what's going on? Like, where's my check? Like, sorry, it's coming. But we really got to bring this on right now. So that makes it kind of interesting. But I think we've done a pretty good job of like, convincing the people that were skeptical that we're going to try to do the right thing and spread the money. And it's actually great. I mean, going back to like that whole fruit fly analogy, right? I mean, that literally happened not too long ago. I heard about the outcome. I'm like, oh wow, okay. I was thinking that way too. I'm like, who the hell cares about fruit fly? Yeah. But there's a good reason for kind of all of it. You never know where the next innovation is going to come from.
So we've got time for about 2 more questions. So I've got one question I got to throw in here real quick, and then we got one more here. But this is something that people should really understand. I know people have asked about this and want to know about it. And even if you don't, you should understand, I think, just because there's actually benefit in it. But what is the whole for-profit, non-profit strategy about?
Oh,
is it legal?
Well, yeah, I've had that question a few times. So we're doing this hybrid model, which most people don't really know about, where we have a C Corp that works as a kind of a sister company to a 501c3. The reason we did it originally was this is originally just going to be a nonprofit. We were doing it for the greater good, and we didn't really care about long-term returns. We didn't think about that. But when we realized we were going to build like a scraper to basically scrape all the university websites and bring in researcher like data from that. And when we started doing that, we realized that this was so outdated, there was no way we could use this. It was outdated and not really in English. So we're like, oh wow, we got to like build this database. And that kind of made us stop and think and go, oh man, how are we going to do that? Like we got to hire people, we got to build this out, we need talent, we need capital. Like you can't really do that in a nonprofit. So we needed a structure that would allow us to do that. And so we created this for-profit, and we basically, like, the for-profit now owns all the data, the whole team works for the for-profit, all the IP, anything of value is in the for-profit. The nonprofit basically has the product, it operates the donor advised fund, it owns all the donor relationships, and it owns all the assets in the fund. and basically the two work, like the nonprofit licenses data from the for-profit and gets revenue from that. But the genius of this was kind of by accident. What this does, it allows us to keep the nonprofit overhead super low. We can take the long-term risk in the for-profit. So the for-profit is capitalizing this whole thing and keeping the overhead, to 10% down to 2% overhead in this nonprofit until the nonprofit grows to the point where that 2% becomes substantial. And that's an advantage that we have over any other nonprofit. You literally could not do that. If we didn't have the for-profit, our overhead would be the 50, 60, 70% that all of the nonprofits charge, and we wouldn't be able to hire the people that we needed or raise capital or do those other things. So it kind of worked out for us, but it hasn't been that straightforward. I mean, I've been chastised for it. Like, is this even legal? It sounds like this for-profit is like, it's just a front. The nonprofit's a front, and you have ulterior motives. And I'm like, well, yeah, if my ulterior motive is to put like 90% in the hands of a researcher instead of like 15%, then yes, I have an ulterior motive. But I've had those arguments time and time again.
It's an easy criticism, right? If someone's doing something that good, it's easy to make that criticism. But it seems like it's really the definition of symbiosis, right? For-profit, non-profit working together, helping each other out, right? And more efficient in the process. That makes sense. Last question.
If there's only time for one more question, this is probably more pertinent than mine.
Well, no, go for it. I already asked two, so that's good.
And just so everyone knows, we are going to have time
There's more wine,
afterwards.
so
Yes,
we'll
absolutely.
So on a more personal level, what drove you to found Benefunder? Some kind of do you make money from Benefunder at all, or is it some kind of combination between trying to make a convoluted system more efficient, coupled with some kind of philanthropic type of Freudian drive, so to speak?
Probably that. I mean, so, and this probably goes back to like the lessons learned in the Army. Someone tells me it can't be done, I'm doing it. That's the worst thing you can tell me. Really, it's actually pretty simple. So I had two companies I was thinking about starting. One of them was Benefunder. The other one was this long story, but it was basically like a booking engine for activities. And I saw a huge opportunity, and I had distribution, I had the technology, I had an investor. It was all kind of ready to go. And I was having this conversation with my wife, and I'm like, I'm kind of torn. Like, which one should I start? I got, this one over here. It's booking engine. It's pretty quick. We can turn it around, and then I got this crazy idea over here that we're going to change the way philanthropic funding works. And she looks at me, and she looks at my at the time 3-year-old, and she goes, "Well, which one do you want to tell him about?" And I'm like, "Damn." That was all I had to hear. And I started Benefunder, and that was it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, and in your spare time, you're evaluating how restaurants can be made more efficient, right?
Yeah. Well, not that much with like a 5-year-old and a 9-month-old. It doesn't happen that much, but yeah, definitely evaluating maybe how our own house, our own internal stuff can be more efficient.
Nice.
But
nice.
maybe buying more time in the morning and the afternoon, like that. But yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and we are going to have until 9 o'clock food and drink, help yourselves, and then the official after party is going to be at Taste and Thirst on 4th and the Gas Lamp at G. And so with that said, let's give a big Starbucks grind. Thank you to Chris and Braemer.